we're here to talk about the number one mistake that parents and caregivers make when they are addressing a meltdown. And trust me, I've been there dozens and dozens and probably hundreds at this point of times where, a child, you think that you've got things handled. You've maybe even set up the day really well. And, you've tried to like preview what's coming up and give a lot of heads ups. And no matter what you try to do, kids are melting down. Or they're throwing their version of a meltdown, which is really just a dysregulation in emotion, strong emotion coming up, is a tantrum, and it's all your fault. And they're letting you know. Or maybe it's a power struggle where you get pulled into and you start to kind of meet each other at that kind of lower level of communication. I'm curious, Natalie's here on Zoom, tuning in from Davis with her 3 and 5-year-old, and all of you who are here on Facebook. I'd love to hear what does a meltdown or a tantrum or power struggle look like in your world? What tends to happen? If you can share that with me, it'd be super helpful because I can tailor the training to you based on your responses. Now, we've been spending some time this past couple months really demystifying meltdowns and sharing strategies that are very soothing in the moment. So if you haven't had a chance to watch those videos, I need to let you know that today is the last day. So you're going to want to head over to the Raising Our Resilience parent group, check out all of the videos that are tagged as announcements because they are coming down this evening. So go ahead and check those out. Be sure to make a note of it, make some time in your schedule. But what I'm here to talk about today is that, in the midst of these meltdowns, oftentimes we're doing our best, we're really trying, but we can do things that actually escalate the emotional conflict once it started. We can do too much of holding the limit or not enough so that it becomes like, a lot of feeling of giving in and even enabling this behavior, saying like, okay, well, when you scream at me, you get what you want. Or we can go the other way and we can be, holding the line so much that we're not even addressing the fact that there's this big event happening, this big emotional experience happening in front of us. And the kids can feel really kind of betrayed, like we're not on their side and we don't support them. And it can be really tricky to bring that kind of like strong expectation and demand together with being supportive. And all of us have been there. How many of you have had a moment where you doubled down on a kid when they're upset and then they just got more upset? If you're in the room full of parents, I can guarantee you that most of the hands would go up. How many of you have given in to whining or, kids like kind of bringing up that kind of emotional response and just like kind of like, here, kid, have the thing, like I just can't anymore. And you later on, you're like, oh no, now I think I've reinforced this idea that they can yell or they can whine or they can throw a tantrum or get big and loud and get what they want. How many of you have been there? Again, I've given these workshops to hundreds and hundreds of parents and hands go up in the air. Absolutely, right? And how many of you can find it hard in the moment to know what to say and do so that you guide your child through that big emotional experience in a way that feels constructive, in a way that feels productive, in a way that helps you still feel connected to your child and even builds mutual trust and respect. Super hard to do. How many of you, we flip our lids instead? So first of all, let me just say how human of you. And what is most likely true, and I'm not going to assume this, but what I've seen is that you maybe weren't necessarily raised or around a model of how to address these big emotional upsets. And even if you were, it's been so long since you've been around it that it's hard to know how to emulate it. Like imagine someone just handing you a guitar and saying like, here, like play this instrument. Like you kind of fiddle around and find some notes and figure that out. But if you were to sit next to someone who could show you all the chords and you look and you strum along, you start to get that muscle memory and you see the example and everything. A lot of us don't have that sort of model, either current model or past model to draw from. And so why you come to a space like this is to get that. So congratulations for being here, first of all. And Jennifer Cormier's with us on Facebook in the group. That's excellent. So good to see you, honey. I know that like Natalie, she's got a young one as well. So just be real with yourself about which way you tend to go. Do you tend to double down and make it worse? Do you tend to give in and then feel like, oh no, like you lost somehow, or you're like turning your kid into a little, maybe some people even are worried about like entitled, like a little entitled, sort of monster who's going to yell and scream to get things, or both, right? And here's what I can say about that is that the first layer of the mistake or the thing that parents tend to do that I would really love us all to try to avoid is we tend to swing between those two strategies, right? Whether it be like really demanding and really firm and really clear, or we'll be like so nurturing and so empathetic and so sort of like validating. And then we might swing to the other one. So one time it could be the exact same thing. They didn't get what they wanted. They're yelling and crying and we're really firm with them. And then another time they're yelling and crying, they're upset. And then we're like, oh, we empathize. Well, what it tells the child is that they might as well keep going with this because they don't really know what they're going to get back. It could be really firm. It could be really, sort of like nurturing and supportive. They're not really sure. And so one huge piece that everybody could start to really lean into is the possibility that these two things can actually coexist. Yeah, that it's possible to be both demanding and supportive in the same interaction, that we don't have to pick one and leave the other one behind. We really don't. And I think there's this idea that you either have to do, it's an either or situation when it's really an and, okay? So what that can sound like is firming up the limit and offering the empathy and validation, and then firming up the requests and the choices, and then letting them know you understand that it's hard, showing them how they can, calm down and insisting that they do, and also showing empathy that it's not easy to choose something right now. And you kind of layer them in together, okay? It's not a first time try kind of like skill to master. And that's why folks stick with me for 6 months or a year, or even 2 years, to continue hearing all the different ways that this can happen, not just in response to meltdowns, but also when siblings are fighting, or when they won't refuse to do something in the routine. And maybe it's not a big blow up, but they're just digging in, all those moments. To bring these two things together is really tricky. And the first thing we can do to head in that direction, and this is my big hot tip, is we can avoid something that's so tempting to do, okay? Which is to argue with emotions as if they had logic, as if they could talk back to you and make sense, as if there was the rationalization possible in these moments when it's just really not, okay? So we talked a bit about this in February, where when the lid flips, the thinking part of the brain, which is that cortex, which is like everything right here, like our mammalian, advanced human part of our brain, especially our prefrontal cortex right here behind our knuckles, the front knuckles here. When we flip our lid, so to speak, in a meltdown or a tantrum, power struggle, when emotions are running high, this part becomes disintegrated with the emotional part and the brainstem, which really is in charge of all the automatic stuff. Like kids will start hitting and kicking and not saying, I'm going to hit and kick. They just start doing it, right? So all of a sudden, this part of the brain's in charge. This thinking part is kind of out to lunch. It's not coordinated anymore. So what we need to do is recognize when the kids' lids are flipped at least halfway or all the way on their own little scale, and you start to notice symptoms like repeating the same words over and over again. They're on a loop. Saying statements that are like always and never, like you always do this, or you never let me, or I'll never get to do this, even though they're going to be able to do it in an hour, right? Like it's often the stuff that doesn't make sense that fits into these always and never statements that come out. Another thing you look for are just like physical symptoms, really hot red cheeks, clenched fists, a completely caved in body language, dragging around, anything that's really big in their body, you can say, okay, their lid is at least halfway off because they're really showing this emotion. When you see that, the last thing you want to do is argue with that emotion that they're experiencing. Okay. Now it's going to be tempting sometimes because you just set a limit and they're having a reaction to you doing what you need to do to be firm and clear with your limits or what your expectations are. And it's going to be tempting to stay in that, on that path, right? And be all demand, all firmness, all you better take me seriously. And I'm not giving in to this tantrum thing you're doing or whatever, right? This reaction. What we lose in that, though, is the opportunity to acknowledge that their lid is flipped and help them get it back on so that they can engage that sort of upstairs brain that Dr. Daniel Siegel has named it, to hug the downstairs brain and like bring things down. We missed it because we keep pushing on the demanding side. We escalate, and we're actually starting to do things like this. I've done it, so I'm going to actually just quote myself here. This isn't even my clients or anyone. This is me, okay? Where I'll say something like, why are you upset? You know, you're going to get to do this again later. And like actually argue with it, because I'm like, I'm being reasonable. I've been pushed to my limit, and I'm like, you shouldn't be upset right now. You're going to get to do this later. And it's kind of this, when you give them that look like, are you losing your mind, you know? Or like, come on, kid, you know? So there's that reaction that can be very much arguing with the emotion. Another is to kind of silver linings it, you know, and say like, well, I know it fell, but at least you have another one, you know, or like, you can always make a new one, and kind of try to talk them out of feeling sad and like experiencing the loss they just had of maybe their Lego creation crashed on the floor and is in 100 pieces. Like giving even just like a moment for them to just acknowledge, like, oh, that is kind of sad, you know, goes a long way. So another way we might argue with an emotion might be like, oh, this is one that's so hard not to do, but sometimes we do it, especially if we have siblings or if we can't relate to their upset. We might say something like, and Coach Amani would call this mirroring. She's one of the coaches in my year-long program. Anyway, so we might say, you should mirror me, and say like, well, when I break things, I don't cry about it. Like I just pick it up and build it again, you know? Or when your brother breaks things, he just tries again, you know? Or, and it's not very kind when you say do it that way, right? So you're basically making it wrong for them to have this experience, and you're saying you should do it like somebody else. You're like comparisons, right? How many of you are guilty of some of these things? Admit it, share it in the chat. Which of those sounded like you? Where you might be arguing with your kid's emotions, either making him wrong somehow, like you're not being logical right now, which is one of the kind of the first example. The last one is a little bit more of like kind of almost shaming, you know, a little shame in there of like, you know, you could be better at this like I am, or like your sibling or your friend is. And, you know, the other ones as well. What sounded like you? What have you done? I'm so curious. Misha is saying, arguing with emotions as if logic exists is great information. Yeah, and consistency is key. Glad you think so, Misha. So glad to have you here with us. Yeah, and Natalie and Jennifer, I'm curious what it would be for you. Like, which of those sounded like you, where you might actually kind of stumble into and find yourself drawn into arguing with the emotion, where in some way you're giving across a message of this is wrong. You're having the wrong emotion. You shouldn't be having this response or reaction, and we want to shut it down. And of course we do. We want it to shift. We want the kids to move through the emotion. But here's my pro tip on how to de-escalate the emotional conflict. And you don't have to give up on holding a limit or boundary, right? You can actually show support and care to your kids, letting them know that you're not here to argue them out of their feelings. Like, I'm not here to fix your feelings, you know? I'm not here to make your feelings wrong. I'm here to let you know, like, wow, like you're having a human experience. And I see that, you know, and I empathize with it, at least enough so that you can see that I get that you're not just being bad, or you're just trying to, you know, manipulate me, or you're just doing these things, because I tell you that even if they are manipulating you, little ones usually have no sense that they're doing it. And the big ones, when they do it, it's pretty still obvious. Like you can tell they're like, they look up and they wait. Like that's different. You know, I'm talking about when they actually get upset. So what we can do is we can tune into them emotionally and just say a sentence about what makes sense in front of us. One sentence. I learned this years and years ago in therapy, actually in relationship therapy, where we would take turns when we were both upset. And it, you know, every marriage, co-parenting, siblings, parent to child, they're all relationships. And when someone's emotional, it makes such a difference when the person who's receiving that can just say one thing that makes sense. Just one thing. Gosh, it makes sense that you're sad about your Lego creation falling down. You worked really hard on that. Yeah, I can see why you might feel sad about that. Or you might be experiencing sadness after seeing it crash on the floor. Yeah, I see that. Oh, I know you're really disappointed that you didn't get a yes when you asked to watch another show. Yeah, I mean, you're really into that show. I get it. I have a hard time turning it off too sometimes. As a matter of fact, sometimes I stay up too late watching stuff that I really should have turned off. Yeah, man, I wish I could change the clock and it would be 3 instead of 3:30. But as you know, 3:30 is when screens are off. Yeah. See, I brought it back to the limit. But did you notice how I started and I was able to connect with their emotional experience? And you can stay in that zone. You really can. You don't have to drop a hammer or put your hands up. Like you get to do both. And clients of mine, like Jennifer's been with me in several events now, right, Jennifer? You've seen me show the blend between being demanding and being supportive. Kathy's here too on Zoom. Hey, Kathy. And you've seen me do this, right, over and over again, bringing together that supportive side, but also keeping the limits and keeping the expectations and helping to guide them towards a reasonable choice. Yeah. So it could sound like that, right? It could sound like, hey, like I see one thing that makes sense about this, or even 2 or 3, and letting them express that feeling in the container of, you have my empathy here, hon. Like this is challenging for you. I see it. I get it. I've felt challenged before too. I hear you're disappointed. I know and understand that you're sad. Maybe they're also mad at you. That's one of the hardest ones to empathize with. Because you just feel attacked, right? And you're like, hey, I get that this is angry making. Like you are clearly not happy with me right now. I mean, and I delivered some news you really didn't want to hear, that like you now you have to take a whole day off from your app game. Yeah, I know, because we talked about not using it after bedtime, but then you did. So yeah, I know. Oh, there must be some part of you really mad that this rule even exists, and maybe even disappointed that you didn't follow it, because now you have to go with you have to have a consequence about it. Yeah, I hear you. Yeah, I don't like getting consequences either. This is really hard. Mm-hmm. Otherwise we can get into the space of like, you knew, like, like lots of like finger pointing and stuff, or we can just be like, oh, okay, if it means that much to you, here you go. Like, like let's just get this situation to stop. I'm thinking about our last conversation about how it's easy to just kind of go like, oh, when you're tired and just like give in. And then also it can be easy, Jen, we've talked about like doubling down, because you're just like, kid, if I don't get this across to you now, then when are you going to actually respect these lines and limits, right? Okay, so I want to help you notice this, okay? So what is the number one thing you're trying to avoid? You want to make sure you don't what with emotions. Starts with an A, okay? So try to avoid at all costs doing this with emotions. So your child's having a big emotion and you don't want to what with them. It's one word. I want to see it in the chat, okay, you all? One word. What do you want to try to avoid? And while you're doing that, I'm going to read what Misha shared. Misha says her 20-year-old son was very upset in a local store that someone wasn't wearing a mask. Yeah, that would be upsetting. And rather than saying, I hear his frustration, I gave reasons why someone might not be wearing one, even though it upset you too. Okay, so this brings to mind something else. It's not always about winning, which is why we do this. It's not always about getting it to stop. Sometimes we are actually reacting to our own over empathizing. How many of you have gotten upset just because your kid is upset? Like, not necessarily because you're taking it badly, but just because you don't want to see them suffer. So sometimes we will argue with an emotion because we actually care too much, almost too much about them not being in that state. Like, we want to relieve them of the suffering. So we're like, oh, no, 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 don't do that. Don't feel sad, don't feel angry, don't feel frustrated or upset, right, Misha? Because there's all these reasons that we can just let that go. Like, you don't need to feel that way. I wonder if that was partly in play for you, Misha. I'd be curious, because maybe in some part of you was like trying to convince him to not be upset so he would have less suffering in that moment. I like that you are aware now that that approach wasn't well received. That's really great awareness. Nice one, Misha. And that she had to circle back and thank him for sharing how he felt and that his feelings were valid. Phew, thanks. Thank goodness you circled back. Yeah, I hear you on that. That was something like a parenting save, right? Like, kind of like heading into the what some people kind of say it's parenting fail, and you're like, well, no, whoop, I'm gonna make it a parenting save. And I love that because Misha is bringing up a good point. It's not too late to circle back if you have done the thing that you're not supposed to do, the thing we're avoiding. Nobody's put in the chat yet. I'm looking, at least that I see. Let me see if I can update emotions. This. Yeah, what's that word? What do we not want to do? What do we want to avoid at all costs, friends? I think I might get it from the delay on Facebook. Someone might be putting it in right now. What is the thing we want to avoid, Kathy and Natalie on Zoom? Tell me, I'm so curious. And if you're watching on the while you're doing that, while you're watching on the Raising Our Resilience page, it has like the hand symbol. That means you're not in the group yet. And I want you to head over there so you can take advantage of the rest of this training and also the whole series that's still up for another day here. And I'll be coming back at 2 p.m. each day. Okay, I mean, each Monday to share more on this topic. Okay, so I'll see you over there. Make sure you click on the link in the posts. All right, so that's that group. So what do we not want to do? Natalie, shaming and yelling. Oh, for sure, we want to avoid that. Yes, good. And that kind of falls under this umbrella of what I was thinking of. That was kind of my big takeaway I want you to have, which is we don't want to fix feelings or what's the other one? Argue. We don't want to argue with emotions. So avoid arguing with emotions. And I purposely pick something that's kind of like, what? Because it'll stick with you even more, right? Because I think you already knew not to yell and shame, Natalie, but it's a good reminder. I'm glad you came up with those specific words, especially if they're helpful to you. What I really want you to have is that we want to avoid arguing with emotions, because that part of the brain, when challenged, just digs in harder or pushes back. And often logic is not what's needed. Yeah, they need more of like what Misha was saying around validating the emotions, and I've been modeling here. And you don't have to give in to do it. Do you see the magic in that? Yeah. So if you have been in this binary situation of like, I either need to be firm or I'm supportive, but I can't have both, I want to welcome you onto the other side of that line, because guess what? It's totally possible. And I've helped parents get there, incrementally over time. Kathy, we're still practicing, right? But I've seen you and Craig make great strides in this. Jennifer, this is something we've come up against several times, right? But as you start to catch yourself and add awareness to those moments through all different tools that I teach, but especially just that pause of going, am I trying to argue with emotions right now? Am I trying to fix feelings? I guess it's not going to work, friends. It's not going to work. So we're going to avoid arguing with emotions. And what we get on the other end is tremendous, right? So now we get to show up as a compassionate guide who's also trustworthy in what we say. Because if we are, setting a limit and then they blow up or they get really upset and start to yell and we give in, we're not a trustworthy person anymore in their mind, because we don't necessarily mean what we say. So that's not good, right? Or we're not trustworthy if when they have feelings, we argue with them or try to fix them or make them wrong in some way, then they won't trust us with sharing themselves vulnerably, and they might need to stuff it down, hide it, take it somewhere else. And when they're young, we still have quite a bit of time to establish this trustworthiness. Yeah. And so you're really lucky if you have the little ones. If you have tweens and teens or even adult children, we might even be doing repair on this. Hey, I've realized in the past, I've really, I haven't had a lot of tolerance for when you're sad. Usually there's like one emotion that's like the bigger one. I haven't really been able to handle it when you get angry. And I now know that I react by doubling down, or I know that I react by giving in and giving up. And I want to own that I didn't show up the way I should have. Like I really should have stopped arguing with how you were feeling and trying to fix it, and given you some time and space to actually process it with me in a way that showed empathy and care for you. I'm really sorry I wasn't there for you that way. And I'm going to really try and do that from here on out. I hope you can forgive me. Oh my gosh, like if you can just think about like adults in your life who maybe made a lot of mistakes when you were growing up, like two come to mind for me. If they were to come back to me with that message, I would just be like feeling so loved and seen and heard, and even like hopeful. And I might even like cry because I'm just like so touched that they took, like, by seeing their growth, it's just moving, but then also like receiving that I mattered enough for them to open up like that. Would be a really big deal. So I would encourage you, even if you have older kids, 10 and over, is even a place to sometimes start when it comes to repair, stating your intention of like how you're going to show up and then actually doing it. And my big tip for how to do it, so avoid arguing and instead really try to blend that support and demand. But the very first thing you can do is find something that makes sense about their experience. Oh, I can see how you would feel this way because this. Oh, I can relate to that. Sometimes when I go through a similar experience, I also experience this emotion. Geez, I can see how this would, this would be upsetting for you. Starting there, so you can just have a little bit of that, but then don't lose track of what you want them to learn from the experience. And that's what Natalie's bringing up, okay? So sometimes it's not about, maybe we're not trying to fix the feeling. Maybe that's not the thing you need to avoid, Natalie. Maybe yours is, maybe going too far. Let me see what you said. Sometimes we argue with fact. Oh yeah, like not having washed their hands when they're crying, insisting that they have, and lying. Yeah, okay. So something that we can get really stuck in when we're arguing in an emotional state is having to have the last word and have it be true, or else. Like there's this feeling of like, if I don't call my kid out on this lie and establish the truth, then we've lost this battle, and they're now going to learn it's okay to lie. Let me tell you, Natalie, if the lid's off, the learning is going to be limited anyway. So if they've already gotten to the place of crying and insisting, they've already crossed the line of like being able to really retract what they're insisting on. So the way that I like to do it is, instead of shifting from hard facts, I kind of shift to what's maybe true about their experience. Like I see that it's really important to you to stick with this story. I call it a story. To stick with your story that you already washed your hands. I see that must be really important to you, because now you're in tears, and some part of you is really sad that we're in this fight right now and this argument about this. Maybe some part of you is even sad that this story even happened in the first place. Yeah, so you're holding on to an interesting story, honey. Yeah, it's quite a story. And you see the softness there, like open-endedness, where like maybe they don't need to keep pushing. But I did. It's like, yeah, that's a great story, honey. Like, interesting story. Yeah, it seems like you really, really want that story to be true. I got you. You really want me to know that that's the story you're sticking with. Right. And then you can still insist, and it's like, well, even washing hands doesn't work always. So here's some hand sanitizer. Let's just all do that now. And you can kind of just shift on, move on. And that can be your firmness, instead of trying to get them to admit the lie or to agree with the truth, the hard fact, right? Kind of move on to like what would be a constructive way forward. And then perhaps later you can address like stories, like why we make up stories sometimes, what to do if somebody notices you've made up a story, what's a graceful way to admit that you made up a story. Lots of good skills to teach there, Natalie, in a calmer time. Is that helpful? Hope you like that one. See what happens when you show up live? You get some direct advice and ideas. Yes, good, good, good. So Misha, Jennifer, and Kathy and Natalie, I'm just so glad you joined us. We are coming to our final minute or two here. And I just want to again urge you to peruse the videos that are up from the last series that are right now in the Facebook group under the announcements area. And if there's anyone in your life who you're like, ooh, I watched something and it made me think of my sister who's complaining, or my neighbor, or someone at my kid's school, or my kid's teacher should really hear this, it's a great time to invite them into the group. Because even if they don't join today and catch these videos, you know, the videos that are coming down, this video from today and the other ones we'll be doing will be up in the group for April and May. So they can still catch some future stuff. So I highly recommend heading over to the little invite button. I can show you where that is real quick. It's really easy. It's really to invite friends. Facebook did this really well. They do some things really well. I'll just leave it at that. This is one of them. As you see, we have 567 members and growing. There's this little invite button. If you click it, it should pull up, you know, like friends' names, and you can just click right next to them and hit send invites, and it just invites them straight into the group. And yours might look a bit like that. It might look a little different on a different browser. But the idea here is to empower parents, as many parents as possible. We really want to get to 1,000 parents this year that we get to support in this way with these weekly tips and trainings, so that, you know, we have more moments of connection and less of, you know, conflict and struggle. We have, you know, we're building toward these lifelong relationships with love and respect and, you know, kind of mutual sense of teamwork, instead of families kind of creating further and further divide where kids can't wait to get out of the house. They grab the keys and leave, and who knows, you know. We want to help everybody be more resilient in all these times of change, with these transitions back to in-person and back out, and hybrid learning and virtual learning, and all the ages and stages of growth that they go through, and all the ways our communities are forming and coming apart. It's just a lot that we're all needing to be resilient in the face of right now. And so that's why this resource and this community. So let me know in the comments below this video, or if you're on Zoom, maybe a final comment or two in the chat, what you got out of this, what your hope is in terms of what you'll put into place next. I always love to hear that. It's also a way that I like to mentor parents who are busy, who will walk away from a training like this and maybe forget what it was if they don't kind of nail it down. So go ahead and throw into the chat here on Zoom for Natalie and Kathy. Those of you who are still with me on the Facebook group can head over to that spot as well underneath in the comments, and I can support you in the comments as well and kind of cheer you on with what you decided you're going to do next, because it's a tremendous thing to raise children. It's one of the most valuable jobs on the planet. We absolutely don't have to do it alone, and we also don't have to do it without any kind of support, mentorship, or training. To me, that's just not fair. So here we are, empowering you to empower each other and as many parents as possible with great strategies and tools. And lots of love to you all. Until next time, see you then. And feel free to also message me anytime. Let me know what you're getting out of the videos, and or put them in the comments below each of the videos so I can see what you're learning and support you with what's next. If you're really leaning into, man, you know, I love more mentorship, we should talk. So go ahead and message me. Let me know you'd be interested in chatting further. Okay, talk to you all. Bye.